everyone. Thanks so much for being here. I'm Kashmir Hill. I'm a technology reporter at the New York Times. Been writing about privacy and technology for about a decade. And I'm going to leave time for questions at the end. I also am going to need a volunteer or two at some point in my talk, so just to prepare you in advance. So I'm talking today about my book, Your Face Belongs to Us. This book started for me in November 2019. I had just basically started as a reporter at the Times, and I got a tip from a public records researcher named Freddie Martinez. And I knew him from covering security and privacy in the past. And I got this email from him. I was in Switzerland. I was 7 months pregnant. And I was there with a bunch of young leaders from Switzerland and the US. And we'd had this big dinner. And everybody else was out drinking. But I was going to go to bed. It was midnight. And I, as we do, check my smartphone. And I have this email from him. And he says, I came across something in public records requests I think is really interesting. I think you might be interested in covering it. And he attached a PDF he'd gotten from the Atlanta Police Department. And in it was a brochure for something called Clearview AI. And I have a little screenshot of it here. And it said, world's best facial recognition technology combined with the world's largest database of headshots. And the first page of this PDF really grabbed my attention because it said privileged and confidential attorney work product at the top. And I don't know if anybody in this room has done a lot of public records requests in their lives, but usually they're pretty boring, and you don't get something as spicy as this. The next thing when I'm reading it is I see who wrote it, and it's Paul Clement, who it was a name I absolutely recognized, former U.S. Solicitor General under George W. Bush, now in private practice at Kirkland & Ellis, a very expensive and talented lawyer. And he had written a legal memo for Clearview AI describing what this technology was. And it described this company I'd never heard of before, that they had scraped billions of photos from the public internet, from social media sites like Facebook, Instagram, Venmo, LinkedIn, employment websites, education websites, to create this really powerful app where you could take a photo of somebody and it would bring up all the other places on the internet where their face appeared. And the memo said that hundreds of police departments were using it, that Paul Clement's colleagues at Kirkland & Ellis had tried it, and that it produced fast and reliable results. And he'd actually written this memo for police departments that were considering this to reassure them that if they use Clearview AI, they wouldn't be breaking state and federal privacy laws. And I mean, when I first heard about this, I initially felt a little skeptical because I had been covering privacy and technology for a long time. I had written about facial recognition technology before. It's something that police have been using since 2000, 2001, when they had an unknown criminal suspect trying to find their face in mugshot databases, maybe even in state driver's license photos. And common knowledge at that point was that it didn't work that well and that police didn't find it to be a very reliable tool. And so the first thing I did, as every great investigative journalist does, is I Googled Clearview AI. And this was their website at the time. There was not much there. You're looking at the entirety of their website. It said, artificial intelligence for a better world. Nothing about facial recognition technology. And then it gave their address at the bottom of the page. And to my surprise, this AI company wasn't based in Silicon Valley or San Francisco. It was based in New York. And the address, when I put it into Google Maps, was 2 blocks away from the New York Times building. And I was like, wow, this is going to be an easy story. So I walked over because I wanted to go knock on the door and meet the people behind this incredible sounding technology. And so I waddled over, my pregnant self, and I got to where Google Maps told me 145 West 41st Street was supposed to be, and it wasn't there. There was no building with that address. There was a parking garage, there was a WeWork. I kept going back and forth. And in the book, I compare it to Harry Potter, where I was like looking for the platform that wasn't there. So I went back to the office. I tried calling Paul Clement to ask him about this memo he'd written. I emailed him, I called him, he's in DC. He didn't respond. I tried to find the people behind the company, and there just wasn't, it was kind of hidden on the internet. There wasn't much information about them. I looked up business filings, tried to contact numbers I found there, and just nobody would respond to me. I was just getting the cold shoulder, and I thought, man, this is, I went on LinkedIn, and it had one employee, and his name was John Good. He had no work experience and 2 connections. And so I sent him a LinkedIn message, and I was like, this person looks fake. So I have one fake employee working out of a fake building. I thought, maybe this is some kind of snake oil that they're selling to police departments, just trying to make money, kind of like Theranos, and it doesn't actually work. But they did say that hundreds of police departments were using the app. So I thought, okay, I'll find police officers who have used Clearview AI, and I'll ask them about it. And I know as a journalist who covers surveillance technologies that police do not always like to talk about the technologies they use because they don't want the bad guys to know how they can be discovered, how they can be tracked down. And so I reached out to a lot of different police departments, and I wasn't getting responses. But then one day, I get a call on my cell phone from Nick Ferrara. This is his picture. He works in Gainesville, Florida. He's a financial crimes detective. And he said, I heard that you have questions about Clearview AI. And I said, I do. Have you used it? And he said, oh, yes, I've used it. I love it. It's incredible. It works like no facial recognition technology product I've ever used. He says, it works even when somebody's wearing glasses, when they're wearing a hat, they can be looking away from the camera. He said, I heard about it on this listserv called Crime Dex. It's like a 45,000 person listserv for people that investigate financial crimes. He said there was an ad there for Clearview AI. They said they were Google for faces, and they were offering 30-day free trials. And so he got in the app, and he said he had on his desk a kind of pile of unsolved cases. He had photos of somebody who had been at a bank ATM or at a bank counter, cashing a forged check, or just some kind of financial fraudster. He had run their photos through the state facial recognition system and not gotten any matches. And so he starts running them through Clearview AI. And he says, I got lead after lead after lead. He said it was really incredible. He said one night he was out on patrol in Gainesville. Gainesville is a college town. The University of Florida is there. And so there were some college kids standing outside a bar, kind of under the dim, street light. And he said, hey, I'm testing out this technology. Do you mind if I try it on you? And they said, sure. And so he took their pictures in this dim lit, street corner. And for 4 out of 5 of them, it led him to their Facebook page or their Instagram page. And he was able to tell them their names. And they said, wow. They said, that's very cool. Where do we get that app? And he says, you can't use this app. This app is only for the police. And they said, that seems very Big Brother. And so I said, wow, that sounds amazing. I'd love to see it for myself. And he said, oh, sure. He said, I can't send you, one of the searches for my police investigations, but just email me your photo, and I'll run it for you and send you your results. And I said, that sounds great. And so I sent him, and I said, oh, do you know anything about the people who run the company? And he says, I don't know. I just know they're in New York. And he says, tell them, I'd happily be their spokesperson if they want me. I love this app so much. So I sent him my photos, and then Nick Ferrara just ghosted me. He never responded. He stopped returning my phone calls. And he just disappeared from my life. And I was like, what happened? I thought maybe he was just working on a big case. And there's another police officer I talked to, and he said, yeah, Clearview AI is great. It doesn't work on somebody if they don't have any photos on the internet, but if they do, it's very good at producing a lead. He said, I would never arrest somebody just based on a Clearview match, but it gives you a great place to start. He said, just earlier this week, I was investigating a sexual assault, and the woman had taken a photo of the perpetrator earlier in the night at a bar, and I was able to run his photo, and it gave me a lead in the case. And so I said again, yeah, I'd love to see what it looks like. He said, send me your photo. I did, and he ran it, and he said, oh, this is very strange. You don't have any results. And I said, that is weird. He says, it's not right, because when I Google your name, there's a lot of photos online. I said, yes. Embarrassingly, there are. And he said, there must be a bug, or maybe their server's down. Obviously, there's something wrong. And then he too ghosted me. And so I finally end up recruiting a police detective who worked in Texas, who was a friend of a colleague of mine at the Times. And he said, I explained the situation. I'm looking into this company. I'm trying to learn more. And he said, OK, sure. So he went to their website and requested access to the app. He had it within 30 minutes. He, because of the work he does as a law enforcement officer, he's pretty careful about not putting too much information on the internet, just worried about if somebody tried to get retribution or trying to gather information about him. And so he tried Clearview AI on himself, and there was a photo which surprised him. His face was really small, and he didn't recognize where the photo came from. He clicked on the photo, and it took him to Twitter. And it was a photo that somebody had taken at a Pride festival. And he had been on patrol in the background of the photo, and he was wearing his little name badge. And so it led from his face to his name. And he was astounded. And he thought, wow, this is going to be so powerful for police investigations, but very concerning for any undercover police officers. This could very quickly lead to their identity. And so I told him what had happened with the first two officers, and he said, okay, well, let me run your photo and see what's going on. And so he did, and there were no results. But then a couple of minutes later, he got a call from a Virginia number, and he picked up, and the person said, hello, this is Marco from Clearview AI tech support, and we saw you just ran a photo that sent an alert in our system. Are you talking to this Kashmir Hill lady from the New York Times? And he played it a little cagey, and he said, well, I'm in Texas. How would I know a New York Times reporter? And they said, well, this is a violation of our terms of service, and we're going to cut off your access to the app. And that's how I found out that even though Clearview AI wasn't talking to me, they had put an alert on my face, and they were getting notified every time a police officer uploaded my photo. So part of the book is about kind of the detective story of figuring out who is behind the company, and ended up being very, very fascinating people and characters. It was actually a really small kind of crew in New York, and the technology was very real. It was not snake oil. It's very powerful. The company has a database of 40 billion photos now that they've scraped from the web. And this is actually the founder here, Juan Tat, on the left. And he's running a search for himself. He is a pretty young guy. I think he was in his late 20s when I first discovered the company, now in his early 30s. Grew up in Australia, half Australian, half Vietnamese. At 19 years old, dropped out of college, studying computer engineering because he felt like the professors weren't teaching him anything. And he moved halfway around the world at 19 years old to San Francisco to try to kind of make good on the tech boom. It was 2008, the iPhone had just come out, everybody was getting on Facebook, and so he was making Facebook games, he was making Facebook quizzes, iPhone games, and eventually he ended up moving to New York and building really powerful technology like Clearview AI. Peter Thiel was actually one of the first investors in Clearview AI. Before it became that, it was called Smart Checker, and he gave him $200,000, and they'd since gotten kind of more money, but they had been keeping it a secret. They weren't ready for the world to know about it. And so I'd come to find that before they approached police as possible users, they actually didn't know what they were going to do with this powerful technology that they had built. They had this ability to take a photo of somebody and find out where they were on the internet, but how do you monetize that? And so initially, they were in New York, so they were thinking, Maybe you could use it for real estate or retail or hospitality. And so they were approaching real estate companies about using it for lobby security, approaching grocery stores about using it to identify shoplifters, and hotels about being able to recognize your high-profile guests as they're coming into the lobby. And they were trying to raise money. And one of the things they were doing is they were just giving Clearview AI out to possible investors, to possible collaborators, kind of the same way that police had gotten free trials. So there were some really fascinating early use cases. One of the people that they had pitched was John Katsimatidis, who's a businessman in New York. He owns the Gristedes markets. And so I called him up to ask him, what Clearview AI was like, what he thought. And he said, we tried it in the markets, but we didn't end up, signing a contract with the company. And I said, what about personally? How did you use it? Or did you ever use it? And he said, yeah, it was actually really useful. He said, I have what did he say? He said, I have 22,000 contacts in my phone, and it's hard for me to, remember everybody. And so it can be really useful for remembering someone's name when we're not all wearing name tags as we are here. And he said, in one time, I was at Cipriani's in Soho, and my daughter walked in, and she was with a man I didn't recognize. They were clearly on a date, and I wanted to know who this guy was to make sure he wasn't a charlatan. He said, so after they sat down, I had the waiter go take a picture of them, and then he came back, and I ran it through Clearview AI, and he said, I identified this guy who's a San Francisco venture capitalist, and he said, I was reassured. And I said, are you sure? I love this, and the police really like this use case over here. Joe Montana they kind of spread through, they were approaching investors in Silicon Valley, and investors loved using the app. They thought it was really useful. It's a fun party trick. It's useful at work conferences when people aren't wearing name tags. And they really loved it, but they weren't investing in Clearview AI. They were running into a lot of problems, kind of raising money, particularly in San Francisco. They had a lot more success in New York. And part of the reason why was that investors were worried about the kind of legal, regulatory, ethical risk of what they had done in terms of collecting all these photos without anyone's consent from the internet. And so while they personally liked using it, they didn't want to invest in it and take those risks. And this was really frustrating Clearview AI's team. And at one point, one of the investors that had been using the app for months and refusing to invest, Juan Tontat got an email from somebody named Joe. And and he just said, hey, this is Joe. My friend, the investor, told me about Clearview AI. I'd really like to try it personally. Joe Montana is an investor now, so he said maybe I would invest in the company. And so Juan Tontat forwarded it to his partner, who's an American, and said, oh God, this investor, he's using the app. He's not investing in us. Now he's telling his friends about it. This guy named Joe wants to use the app. And so his partner called him up and said, that's Joe Montana. He's very famous, and you should definitely let him use the app, which he did. But where they really ran into success and finally found users for the product was with the police. And their first department that used them was the NYPD. They were introduced because one of the real estate firms they had approached, the head of security used to work at the NYPD, and he said, oh man, my colleagues would love this. He introduced them. And Clearview AI had just been used the police officers really love this app, and especially child crime investigators. So I interviewed the investigator who worked on this case in the bottom left, and he worked for the Department of Homeland Security. And this case landed in his lap because these photos of abuse had been found in the Yahoo account of somebody who lived in Syria. And so they have this photo of a man with a child, sexually explicit, and they can tell from the electrical outlets in the background of the photo that it's somewhere in the United States, but they don't know where. And this is, the police do keep track of kind of known victims, and they keep this database of photos, and they look for those photos. A lot of the technology companies are monitoring accounts all the time, looking for any of those to show up. But in this case, it was a new victim. And so he at first thought, yeah, how am I going to do this? How am I going to find this little girl and rescue her? And so he sent the man's photo around to some other child crime investigators, said, have you ever seen this perpetrator before? Does anybody recognize this child? And one of the people he sent it to worked with NYPD. And she said, well, let me run it through Clearview AI. So she did. And then she sent him the photo in the bottom right, which I know is kind of tiny here. But he looked at the photo, and it's a woman, and then it's an Asian American bodybuilder. And he said, neither one of those is the guy I'm looking for. And she said, look in the background of the photo. And so if you can see the guy that's kind of in a green shirt in the background, that was the match. And he ended up getting from this photo, following these bread trail crumbs to figure out who that guy was, basically by contacting the company whose booth he's standing behind. And he ended up being a contract worker they had hired at this Las Vegas convention. And he tracked him down and rescued the child. And this guy's now in prison. It was the first time the Department of Homeland Security used Clearview AI. His boss said, we have to get a subscription to this app. And so they are now users. Very powerful technology. I think can be very scary, this idea that any of us can be identified, find all of our photos online. I don't think most of us were expecting this to happen. And I went to Juan Tat, that creator, the guy who grew up in Australia, and I said, how did you build this incredible technology? How did Clearview AI do this before some other company like Google or Facebook? How did you beat them to this? I mean, this is what he had made before. Before he did Clearview AI, he made a game called Expando for the iPhone, and he made an app called Trump Hair, where you could put Trump's hair on the faces of people in your photos. And I said, how did you get here? And he said, well, I went on Twitter and I followed machine learning experts. He said, I went on GitHub, which is a kind of coding library. He said, I searched for facial recognition algorithms. And we just looked at each other and we started laughing. And I said, that sounds ridiculous. And he said, I know, it sounds like I Googled flying car and then I built one. Said it did. But really what Clearview AI had done was building on decades of research into facial recognition technology. And the science engineering community has been trying to build something like this since the early 1960s in Silicon Valley, before it was called Silicon Valley. The CIA funded really, really early research to try to make a facial recognition system. And for years, for decades, they didn't have much success. There would be these breakthroughs, in the 80s and the 90s, where they were able to identify, one person in a database of 16 people. But it got better and better over time, and particularly in the last decade with the development of machine learning, neural networks, all these kinds of powerful pattern recognition technologies that we're seeing come today that you use in the form of ChatGPT. It's the ability of computers to just ingest so much data, from all over the internet and find patterns in it. And so with faces in particular, it was very easy to do this because we had all put all these photos on the internet of ourselves. We went on Facebook and we uploaded thousands and thousands of photos of ourselves, and we tagged ourselves at parties, in dim rooms, looking away from the camera, wearing funny costumes. And computer science technologists, they were able to take all those photos, thousands of photos, and be able to tell a computer, this is all the same person. And so it really was incredible. And so he said one of the databases that he mined was called OpenFace. It had been released by Carnegie Mellon graduate students. And it was interesting to me because at the bottom of their description, it says, please use responsibly. And it says, we do not support the use of this project in applications that violate privacy and security. So I don't think they would be happy necessarily that they were used to help develop Clearview AI. And part of the book is about the fact that technology companies weren't very good about protecting our photos online. You know, it's pretty easy to go and scrape our photos from places like Facebook, Instagram, Venmo. And what Clearview AI did, I assumed at first they'd made a technological breakthrough, that they beat Google and Facebook to the punch. But they didn't, Juan Tantat did not beat Google and Facebook. They had developed something like Clearview AI at both companies, and they decided not to release it. As early as 2011, Google said that it had developed a kind of facial recognition like this, where you could take a photo of a stranger and identify them and find other photos of them online, but that they decided to hold it back. Then Chairman Eric Schmidt said it was the one technology at that time that Google had developed and decided not to release because they thought it was too dangerous. Obviously, so many beneficial applications, but also what could a dictator do with this? How could it be used to suppress, dissent, monitor dissidents? And so what Clearview AI had done wasn't a technical breakthrough, it was an ethical breakthrough. They were willing to do what other companies had not been willing to do. Kind of a classic regulatory entrepreneur, like an Uber or an Airbnb. They were wading into these kind of murky waters, both legal and ethical, to put this out there. And they thought for good reason. Juan Tantat said, this is amazing. I mean, we're helping police around the world solve crimes. Once I did the initial story about Clearview, and I detail this in the book, but there was definitely a lot of backlash. And a lot of countries were really upset about it. They felt that it violated their privacy laws, and that's something that the company is still navigating. But the thing is, this is increasingly accessible. This is not just something Clearview AI has done. There are now other companies that have done this. Clearview AI restricts use of their tool to police. But there are search engines online where anybody can do this. Clearview's database is 40 billion photos. These databases are smaller. They don't often, PimEyes is an example that I have here. It's a face search engine. They have 2 billion photos. They didn't scrape social media. So it's not as kind of powerful or as revealing as Clearview AI, but it is pretty powerful. And so this is a search I've run of my face on PimEyes. It's mostly photos I know about and that I probably put on the internet, as opposed to a Clearview AI search where, honestly, stunning results. Photos of me in 2007 at a concert in Washington, D.C., in a crowd in the background of someone else's photo. Me walking down a city street where I didn't even recognize myself at first because I was in profile and it was so long ago, but I recognized my jacket because I had bought it at a consignment store in Tokyo, and it was just a very unique jacket, so I knew it was me. I ran photos with their consent of my colleagues. This is Cecilia Kong. She covers technology and policy and power in Washington, D.C. She submitted this photo. She gave me this photo of herself in a COVID mask. I ran it through PimEyes. It still got results. My colleague, Erin Griffith, she covers startups in San Francisco. The photo we ran was of her in glasses, in a hat. Still got results. This is how I discovered she used to be in a band, because there was a band photo that came up of her. My colleague, Mark Tracy, who covers culture at the New York Times, he's got facial hair, he's got glasses, and it was able to match him to these photos of a much younger him, where I'm not even sure I would realize it was him. There's one where he's in the background of a big crowd interviewing LeBron James. This is PimEyes. So this is a less powerful engine than Clearview, but it is online. It advertises itself as a way to search for your own photos, to see how exposed you are on the internet. And so it says, please only run your own face. But if you have a subscription, like I do, I pay $30 a month for it. It lets me run 25 searches a day. and there's no technical measures in place to make sure that I'm only running my face print. So last night at the dinner, I was at a table and with the consent of everyone there, ran everyone's photos and did find everybody. And it's a fun party trick when it's being used with consent. But you can imagine something more nefarious, right? You're out to dinner, you're having a private conversation, maybe work gossip or something personal happening in your life, or something politically important, interesting to the people around you. We can do that because we assume, everyone around us is kind of anonymous. We assume an anonymity a lot when we're navigating the world. But with a power like this, if somebody gets too interested, they snap your photo, they find out who you are, they understand the context of your conversation. I think that's the kind of potential frightening way it can be used. Promise and peril. So obviously, incredibly useful for law enforcement. That said, sometimes we have doppelgangers in the world. As one professor told me, we're not all unique snowflakes. And so sometimes facial recognition is going to turn up somebody who looks like you. And though police had told me at the outset they would never arrest somebody just based on a facial recognition match, that has happened. There's a handful of people who have been arrested for the crime of looking like someone else on not enough other corroborating evidence. Sometimes they'll go to an eyewitness and show them a photo that came up from the facial recognition system, and then we'll run into this problem of the eyewitness agreeing with the computer. The computer went through a database of millions or hundreds of millions of people and found the person that looked the most like that suspect. The human being is going to say, yeah, I agree with the computer, that's them. So it can lead to false arrest if police aren't doing enough other detective work. I think one of the most interesting use cases I've seen happened just as I was finishing the book, and I honestly was shocked by it, was Madison Square Garden in New York City, owned by James Dolan. It's where the Knicks play, it's where the Rangers play, it's where every kind of musical act dreams of performing. About a year ago, lawyers who wanted to go see Mariah Carey concert, a mom who wanted to take her daughter's Girl Scout troop to see the Rockettes at Radio City Music Hall, also owned by MSG, they would be stopped at the door and told, I'm sorry, you can't come in. You work for a law firm that has a lawsuit against us, and you're not welcome until that litigation is resolved. And it turns out Madison Square Garden, they've been using facial recognition technology for security purposes since 2018, but James Dolan, who's quite a character, decided he could also use the system to basically punish his enemies. And so Madison Square Garden had gone through about 90 law firms that had lawsuits against them, went to their websites, scraped the photos of lawyers from their own biography pages and put them on this list of people that weren't allowed in. And it didn't matter if you were involved in the suit, if you just worked at the firm, you couldn't come in. And so I actually saw this happen. I took a personal injury attorney I bought us Rangers tickets just so I could see this. I wanted to see it for myself. And you get to Madison Square Garden, there's thousands of people streaming in. We put our bags on the conveyor belt. By the time we picked them up, a security guard approached us. He asked her for her ID, and she showed it, and he said, you're going to have to wait here. Then she was informed she wasn't allowed in, and so we left. I mean, it can be incredibly powerful, this technology. I said, wow. He said, have you been to Madison Square Garden recently? And she's like, well, I came to a Knicks game two weeks ago, Knicks versus Cavs. She was a Cavs fan. And apparently she'd worn a ball cap, glasses, and a COVID mask. So you can still evade the technology. So if this worries you, one, just be careful about what you're putting on the internet. Increasingly, it's not just facial recognition. Companies are scraping it. Basically, all these big AI companies are really treating the internet as a public commons, and there's a lot of data that's being collected there. And that's something we're still trying to figure out with facial recognition, with generative AI, who should be entitled to all of our data, what we've put out there about ourselves. You can move to Illinois. Illinois is one of the only states with this really strong law that applies to facial recognition technology. I tell the history of the law in the book. It was passed in 2008. The rare law that moved faster than technology. It's called the Biometric Information Privacy Act. And it says that any company that wants to use your face print, your voice print, your fingerprints, your iris, that they need your permission to do it, or they have to pay a very big fine. So Madison Square Garden, for example, using facial recognition technology to keep lawyers out of MSG and Radio City Music Hall and Beacon Theater. They have a theater in Chicago, and they are not keeping lawyers out there with facial recognition technology. They would need their permission to use their face print. Some states have privacy laws that are applicable. So for those who live here in California, you can go to Clearview AI and you can request your search. You can see what it looks like. You can see what photos are in there. And if you don't want to be in Clearview AI's database, you can request deletion. PIMEYES also offers an opt-out. I'm not sure how many people know that they can do this, or maybe they don't care. Maybe they don't mind being in the facial recognition database, because the California law requires every company to report its statistics about how many people have asked for their information or asked to delete their information. And last year, what's California's population? Anybody know in the room? 49 million? 45 million people. About 3,000 of them total approached Clearview for their data, and 1,700 of them requested to be deleted. So, defaults are powerful, right? In the United States, the way we're approaching privacy for the most part, outside of Illinois, is these companies can collect information about us, and we have the right to get out of the database. It's a very different approach from Europe, where the law is you can't collect that information without consent. So European countries all, after I exposed the existence of Clearview AI, investigated the company and said that what it did was illegal. They kicked them out. It's continuing battles, but it was a very different approach, whereas here, what Clearview is doing is mostly legal. So I'm going to take questions, and if there's anybody who would like to do a search, a PIMEYES search, I would love to show it live for anybody willing. Yes, the tale is in the book, but I did find them. Elizabeth, do you want to be my guinea pig, or do you want to ask a question? Come up, and I'll take a question while we're doing it. Yeah, absolutely. So she asked how's it getting used in immigration. We are seeing facial recognition increasingly used at the borders. It's usually to confirm that you are you, like match your face to your passport. But yeah, you can definitely use this to verify people's identity. So Ukraine, I had it up there, I didn't talk about it. Ukraine was using Clearview AI, so it could it could check people's identities, make sure they're not, actually Russian citizens or Russian spies. They ended up using it kind of in a disturbing way on Russian soldiers who had been killed. They would run their faces, find them on social media, find their loved ones, reach out to them, send them that photo of their dead son, dead brother, dead husband, in order to let them know the cost of the war and try to turn the tide, the public tide in Russia. So yeah, it can be powerful. ICE does have a subscription to Clearview AI. They say they're only using it, though, for the child crime investigations at this point, or last I heard from them. Okay, Elizabeth, we're gonna, I'm not gonna do that. We're gonna take a picture. Okay. I have a feeling you're gonna be on the internet. Sometimes they're a ghost. Okay, I'm gonna do safe search. This site does tend to over-index on explicit results, because part of the business model is it'll help you get those photos off the internet. And I definitely ran a search once. Oh, I love your curly hair. So is there one, is there any that I can click on?
I don't recognize that anymore.
Okay.
Oh,
So we're going to open the image. Oh, so this is you in the crowd watching Obama speak somewhere. And that is from sunnylands.org, past retreats. So yeah, I mean, you can pretty quickly get from someone's face. And I'll do more of these. I'm signing books afterwards, but I'll run more searches for anybody who wants them. But yeah, I mean, it's and let's go down, Elizabeth. So this is looking through 2 billion photos. And most of these are her, and it's ranked in order of confidence it's her. So obviously we're getting to some doppelgangers who aren't her at the bottom. But I mean, it's incredible. Yeah. Yeah. Wait, can you not see? Oh, okay. So this is you, and then we get to your doppelgangers at the bottom. So those are not you.
I mean, but definitely could be.
Yeah, right? You can find your doppelgangers in the world. The question is, are they going to use this as a political tool? I actually have been kind of asking opposition researchers, is this going to be in the toolbox? We have already seen at least one case in a Virginia race, a local race, a candidate who had done some online sex work, basically making videos with her husband on a site where you could get tipped. It was supposed to be like an ephemeral site, but some of it had been archived. And she was a Democrat, a Republican operative, found those images, those videos somehow. They were on the internet. They were not associated with her name. It's unclear if they just happened upon it, while they were viewing things on the internet, or if they did a facial recognition search, but it would have come up in the facial recognition search. And so they provided that to the Washington Post, and Washington Post did a big story about it. And so this could be a powerful tool, clearly, for opposition research. Run someone's face. Maybe there are photos they don't know about, embarrassing photos. So I think we'll see it come up more in politics, certainly. I'll take one in the back. Yes. Facial recognition that's used for sign-ons or banks. I think that facial recognition that we use on our phones, you're talking about like open a bank app with your phone, potentially. I think that is pretty safe. And partly it's safe because of the way that Apple has designed it. You're not giving your face print to the bank. Apple is keeping it on the phone. So this is just staying on your iPhone or staying on your Android device. And so I do that. And, I open my iPhone with my face, and I open apps with my face. And that's a different kind of facial recognition, right? It's one-to-one. It's making sure you are you. And it can be really convenient. We're seeing that more and more. You don't have to wait, in an hour or 3-hour-long line at customs. I traveled to London for the book because they're sending vans out in London with facial recognition cameras on the roof and scanning crowds to find people that are wanted to kind of arrest them. And so I definitely wanted to go see that. And when I went to London, you land, I put my passport on the little kiosk and I walked right in. There was no line. I mean, that's a very convenient use of this technology. And it's different from, searching through, billions of photos, millions of photos to find somebody, what they call one-to-end search. I think the kind of fear is that we get too used to it and we kind of get very comfortable with facial recognition technology, and that might open the door to more dystopian uses of it. Seeing it not just as you're walking through that gate, but then as you're walking all around the UK, if you're followed everywhere, trackable everywhere, which is something we're seeing in Russia, in China, where they have used facial recognition technology to identify protesters, monitor what they consider to be dissident groups, and more day-to-day use cases like automatically ticketing people for jaywalking. I think the craziest use case in China is they put facial recognition technology into a public restroom in Beijing where people were stealing toilet paper. And so now you have to look into a camera to get like this much toilet paper. And if you need more, you have to wait 7 minutes and then look again. And so I think that's my worry, is that this just is kind of spreads through all of our interactions, all of our daily lives. And I think it could be quite chilling when it is that widespread in its use.